Hi everyone, welcome. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes to let a few more people join the webinar. There are quite a few of you signed up today. Okay, let's get going. So hello everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today from around the world. I'm Tess Wilkinson and I'm Director of Education at Henley and Partners Education. This was launched 2 months ago in response to the increasing demands of clients for expert and impartial advice on the best global education options for their children. One of the many benefits of investment migration is enhanced access to premium global education. And in unpredictable times, most of our clients are looking to secure world-class education for their children in top schools and universities that provide a stable, safe, and nurturing environment. The past 2 years have been enormously disrupted due to the pandemic, and whilst international education was still operating and the provision of online education for students put in place, the quality varied greatly. And the result is that many parents are looking for other solutions to future-proof their children's education. Many of our clients are rightly confused as to who to turn to for advice regarding education and which countries they should go to so their children can access great education that will equip them for the future. By providing extensive sector-specific expertise through our global networks and highly experienced consultants, we work hand in hand with our families to ensure that their child is placed in a university or school which matches their talents, aspirations, and academic ability. Now, the good news is that many countries that host residence and citizenship by investment programs, such as the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and numerous European countries, are home to the world's best educational institutions. With so many options, Henley and Partners Education is here to help you make one of life's most important and difficult decisions, choosing the right education for your child. And with that in mind, we're delighted to welcome you to this week's webinar series on global universities. Over the next 3 days, our university consultants will share their expertise on the options available in the countries they specialise in. Now, 2 of the most popular and desired locations for higher education are the USA and Canada, and I'm delighted to welcome my colleague David Hawkins, who will walk us through the higher education landscape in these countries and answer any questions that you may have. Now, there is a Q&A box on Zoom, so you'll be able to please put your questions in there, and I'll either try and answer them during David's presentation, but we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so feel free to stay and ask questions then. Anyway, so David is one of the world's top independent college counsellors, specialising in supporting families and students to enter some of the world's best globally ranked university, and most importantly, helping students to work out which institutions are the best match for them. David is one of only 19 people in the world to hold the gold standard international affiliation with the Council of International Schools. And as an Oxford University graduate, David was the head of college counselling at the International School of Brussels, which is one of the largest in Europe. And before that, he was head of careers and a history teacher at Taunton Boarding School in the UK. David holds memberships in the International Association for College Admissions Counselling, the Independent Educational Consultants Association, the Higher Education Consultants Association, and the Council of British International Schools. I managed to say that about right. Anyway, so without further ado, David, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tess. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's lovely to be with you all here today to talk about 2 wonderful university systems which you may be interested in for your children, and to hopefully give you some guidance on to what to consider with these processes and to move forwards with them. It's really crucial to understand the nuances involved because when we start to consider universities in other parts of the world, we need to understand them on their terms, not necessarily what we might be used to in our home or our own countries of education. And the USA is one which actually works on almost a fundamentally different basis to any other university system on the planet. It is, without doubt, the world's most complicated university admission system. And when we're supporting a family through applying to the USA, what we need to understand is it's not just looking at the tactics of how you apply, what do I do to get in, but needing to have an overall strategy on top of that. If you joined the webinar on the UK earlier by my colleague and friend Richard, he did very much focused on the process by which you go through a UK application, the tactics of doing this, followed by this to get an offer. And that's going to be broadly the same in most countries you deal with. Certainly when I talk about Canada later on today and the session I'm doing on Europe tomorrow, you will find that all of those kind of tactical elements come into it. But the problem with the USA is that you need to have an overall strategy first, which will inform your tactics. And that's because in the USA, there is no national higher education system. There isn't a government controlling the system like you will find in the UK, the Republic of Ireland, or in Germany. We have multiple systems. First of all, we have private universities, including some of the very famous places like Harvard and Stanford and Princeton, who can really run their admission system in any way they want to. There are different timelines and deadlines and paperwork. And then the government-controlled systems that we have are of each state. So there is a different system in New York State, as there is in Michigan State, as there is in Florida State, etc. And we have competing timelines and deadlines between all of them. So it's perfectly normal that one student applying to the USA will have a completely set of tasks and deadlines than another student applying to the USA, depending on their overall strategy. And so because it is so much more complicated, the process is going to require much more work for the student and the family to go through this process, because there are things that they have to figure out first. And so the starting point is to really understand, what am I applying for? This is perhaps the major difference between the US and almost every other system. In the UK, in Europe, in Asia, in most countries, we apply to university to be a student of a subject. So Tess mentioned my degree from the University of Oxford. I was considered by that university as a student of history. They were considering me to be a history student at their university. And that is a different set of things I would have to do than if that same university were considering me as a physics student or a chemistry student or a classics student. And that's the process that we're typically used to in university admissions, where the university will look at the student's own profile as they match for a subject. Well, the thing is, in the United States, you're typically not applying for a subject. You're applying for something broader. You're saying to a university, I would like to be a member of your community. Now, that community will have academic characteristics, but when you go to study in the United States, you are studying a much broader curriculum, a much greater range of subjects, as I'll explain a little bit later on. But it's also the bigger match that's being made about your fit for the wider culture of an institution, the clubs, the residential communities, the ethos of that university. Is it very urban? Is it rural? Does it have a religious foundation or not? Is it large? Is it small? Do sports play a big role or not? And so on and so forth. And so students we tend to find might translate a British, European, Asian system to the US and almost get themselves confused, because you can find maths at Harvard, maths at Columbia. And that might look broadly similar to a maths degree in Amsterdam or in London or in Hong Kong. But that's only going to be a third of what the student studies. And the other 2/3 of what you would study would be quite different between Harvard and Columbia. Same with French at Yale, French at Michigan. The French major might look similar, but the different culture of being a relatively small traditional residential college in New Haven, Connecticut at Yale is going to be fundamentally different from being at a really large multi-college university like the University of Michigan with its 110,000-seater stadium. So culture and academics interplay in the US process much more than they would do in any other countries. So students need to figure out, what am I applying for? And then the flip of that, what are these admissions officers selecting me for, before you can really start to build your university list? You have to have that overall strategy first before we can start to delve into the mechanics, the tactics of this, followed by this, followed by this. And I'll use 3 examples here just to demonstrate the complexities of this. So I picked 3 well-known universities here, Brown, Cornell, and the University of Pennsylvania, all universities in the Ivy League, if that's a term we might explore a little bit later on. And you can see these universities are very highly ranked in the Times Higher Education in the world, very highly ranked in the US News and World Report rankings. If you were going to send them an ACT score, you need a pretty high score. The ACT is out of 36. As you can see, that sort of 75% of the students who are getting into these universities have very nearly or a perfect score. These universities have very low admit rates, these 6%, 6.9%, 7.4%, and the number of students they're taking in is kind of broadly similar. So what we've got here are very competitive, world-class, name brand elite universities. However, what you're actually applying for is going to be different between them. A student applying to Brown University only has one option. You are applying to join the college. Now, if you are a computer scientist, mechanical engineer, an economist, or a student of literature, you are all in the same bit. And the process by which the admissions officers need to figure out whether you should be coming to them is going to be your match for their open curriculum, a very flexible process of studies. Now, if those 4 students are applying to the University of Pennsylvania, you'll see that they have to choose one of 4 different colleges to apply for. So College of Arts and Sciences, School of Business and Engineering, School of Nursing, or School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. So my English literature students going to the College of Arts and Sciences. That economist would be applying to Wharton. The engineer is going to the School of Engineering, and the computer scientist actually has to choose, do I want a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science? And each of those colleges is going to have a slightly narrower curriculum based on what you're applying for. Then if those students were also applying to Cornell, we see it's an even bigger university, subdivided even more, with a specialist college of computing. And therefore the curriculum requirements are going to be again narrower. So if we take that mythical computer scientist I'm describing here, we have a challenge if we don't get the overall strategy right. The computer scientist applying to Cornell would want to be presenting themselves as an applicant to the College of Computing as the geekiest of geeky computer scientists, because they are saying, I want to come to your College of Computing, and all those complicated essays and activities and extracurriculars that they're putting together for the application would need to be selling the student as a computer scientist. Well, the problem we have is that application is also going to the University of Pennsylvania and Brown, is that that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for students with perhaps a little bit broader at Penn or much broader at Brown for a match for their community. And so there are higher order questions to the US process than there are in any other system on the planet, because it's not a student to a subject match. You have to understand much more about the culture and the curriculum of the universities you're choosing to apply to before you can start to figure this out. Why does this matter? It matters because of the sort of universities a lot of families aspire for their children to go to. They have many more qualified applicants than they can really fit into them. And so what we're talking about at universities is fit. The university will have a general sense of the academic level of the students that it's looking to go to. So if you're aspiring to top 25 or 30 US university, they're going to need to see a track record of almost complete success through the last 4 years of high school. Whatever education system that is, you basically need to have not failed anything and be really bumping along the top of your cohort. But that's still too many students. So once they've said, right, well, you are good enough to be here, at that point, they're looking for fit. Of all the students who we think are smart enough to be at our institution, which ones fit us best? In exactly the same way as a nice jacket or a pair of shoes, just is that nice snug fit. That's what the universities are looking for. And beyond that, they may also be looking for an additional hook that makes you stand out. Are you, for example, an elite level athlete? Have you got significant connections to the university through family links? Do you represent a demographic that they don't normally get in there, be that a religious background, an ethnic background, a country of the world, or a very particular academic interest that gives you an extra hook in? So those strategic things matter. But there's also, again, a mechanical aspect in here that's really important for students to understand, because, again, unlike most other university systems, you're going to have to write essays explaining why you want to go to that university. And so I've got Columbia University here in New York City as an example of it. Columbia has a very traditional curriculum. I'll show you a little bit more later on, with very, very intense levels of reading that every student has to do. Whether you're a physicist or an English literature major, there's a lot of books you have to read. And when you apply to Columbia, they ask you questions about reading. If you don't know that Columbia, regardless of whether it has maths or physics or history, also requires you to read a lot of books, you might be slightly surprised when you get to open up that application and think, why are they asking me about books? You may not have prepared in the 4, 5, 6 months before that application to read a lot of books to then be able to write about them in an application. So it matters most crucially for the students is that there are things that they're going to be tested on in the admissions process that they need to know 6 to 8 months ahead of time are going to be things that universities will want me to do. Or potentially, if you are a physicist or a computer scientist applying to Columbia and you don't like reading books, well, you probably shouldn't be applying to that university. You want to figure that out earlier rather than being surprised later on because you didn't do the due diligence to understand actually what is this university experience going to be like. This selectivity that I mentioned is not something to be taken lightly, and it is where, again, families can sometimes get themselves a little confused. America has 4.3 million students graduating high school each year. And so when we look at the most well-known universities in the US, we'll find that those universities have a level of selectivity significantly higher than other places. So you'll see, for example, that Oxford and Cambridge would not even make a top 50 list of the most selected universities if we sort of pulled them up and stuck them in America. We have more students applying to universities which are very small, and you see the numbers here as well. And there is no application limit like you'll find in other countries where the students are told that they can only apply to, say, 5 universities, as in the UK. So more students applying to smaller universities and making many more applications per student, we end up with a level of rejectivity, where universities are rejecting 95, 97, 98% of the people who apply, way beyond anywhere else we're going to. And so that's where you can see, for example, here from the UK, very small numbers from each country getting into it. And you can look at Harvard's website and find from whatever country in the world you might currently be from or might be considering getting residency or citizenship in, how few students there are. There are some countries where Harvard has 1 student over 4 years, 1 student. And so the level of competition we're talking about is so intense. This idea of really understanding what I'm being selected for is crucial to the process. So let's unpack that a little bit. As I've said, in the UK, in Europe, in large parts of Asia, we are applying to the subject. It's a bit like going for a set menu at a restaurant. You've kind of chosen what you're getting before you turn up. Now, if you were going out for Italian food and you've got all your friends together and you've all pre-ordered your food, you would be a little surprised if you turned up and halfway through they said, and now you must have a Korean dish. But in the US, that level of regulation is actually what it's like. Going out for a US degree is more like picking a buffet, but with regulations about what you must exactly have. So as I did my history degree, as I said, at the University of Oxford, every single class I took over my time there was about history. If, however, I'd gone to a US university, only about 1/3 to half of the classes I would have taken would have been history. The other bits would have been a combination of things the university forced me to take, and then other things I would like to take. Now, in that bit of what the universities force you to take comes the consideration students have to make. Most US universities will force all students to continue to take subjects that cross the academic disciplines. So the student might be taking first language, some second language courses, some maths, some science, humanities, social sciences, some arts, even in many cases, some physical education. But how strict or loosely that is defined will differ from university to university. Also in there is understanding that the way students are assessed to get their degree is also different. Again, in most countries around the world, you'll study for a period of time in your first year, probably take some exams at the end, and then you'll study for your next couple of years and take exams at the end of that, and that is how your degree is done. But in the US system, every class you're taking in every semester, so typically 8 semesters over 4 years, counts towards your final degree. So that French class you're taking in your first semester of your first year to tick a requirement may be worth as much as a class in your major you take in your 3rd and 4th year, which allows you this flexibility, almost like little Lego blocks building towards your degree in the US, to create it in your own way. Whereas the US is a bit like being on this defined, so the UK or Europe on a defined pathway. You start here, you get to there, and every step in between was already laid out for you. And just to show you some examples of how that works and where this research has to go on, I've shot, as I mentioned here, Columbia College having a very traditional curriculum. They have what's known as a core curriculum, and you can click through these links if you found this on their website, and it will tell you to the very book what books every student must read. It is that defined. So you can't go in and say, oh, I need to take a philosophy class, here's 16 I'll choose from. They will tell you you are reading these books. Small groups of about 12 students and discussing those books. You can't go on Wikipedia and figure it out. You've actually got to read those texts. You've got somewhere else here. This is Caltech, the one with a bit of orange text. And yes, Caltech exists in most people's heads as that sort of techie STEM maths and engineering place. But you'll notice here in the first year, yes, there's a lot of maths, physics, chemistry, and biology in here. Doesn't say necessarily all the majors, but also we've still got classes in the humanities and social sciences, and indeed 3 units of physical education of PE per term. So just two different examples of how completely different a US curriculum is from what families and students might be used to in countries around the world. And then on top of those academic differences, we also have the cultural differences, because you are joining a community. In America, they have this term, the alma mater, the Latin word for other mother. But this place that I have studied at is going to be another part of my family. I'm going to feel the same loyalty to this university as I do to my own family. So those communities are really important as well. And they can be very different from each other too. The one in the middle with the glass on it is the library at the University of California, San Diego, a very well-regarded university, lots of amazing options there. And it's a public university in Southern California. So that outdoor lifestyle is going to be a big part of the culture there, but it's also designed mostly for students from Southern California. So it's going to have a very significant Hispanic community, given the demographics of that state. Now that's going to feel very different from the one with the big stadium here. This is the University of Michigan's big house. Yes, 110,000 people fit into that stadium. It's going to be significantly colder than Southern California, but it's got a very big sporty culture. As you can see there, where students will wear their blue and gold colours, they'll go and cheer on the team, in this case, a nice hockey game. They'll hate all their rivals from Michigan State. It's a very different kind of vibe. That's also going to feel very different from the Gothic building you see here with the church tower of a college in the northeast of the United States, where you're going to have the trees turning that beautiful colour. There'll be the bells from the chapel. You might be going to choir. You might be having the fire on the evening and sitting around with the professor talking about your classes. You'll know everybody on the campus. This actually is also got a college got another quirk to it, because this is Wellesley College just outside Boston, which is one of the most famous women's colleges in the United States as well. So three examples where the universities are, yes, going to be wanting to see that match between the applicants and their curriculum, but also more deeply understanding the kind of community and experience that university is offering, and asking the student to write questions explaining not just what do you want to study, but what kind of person are you, and how might that match with who we are as an institution? So much more that has to be considered in there as well. And this is therefore why the work that students are having to do in their applications to the USA are significantly broader than they will be for other systems. So typically, if students are going to be using the Common Application, and this is an application portal that about 700 or 800 US universities, and indeed some international ones, have chosen to use to give at least some of the administrative stuff, who you are, where you live, your phone number, etc., in one place. And so typically the university is going to ask to see a general essay within that. It's normally 7 prompts. I've only shown you 3 here, and students have to write one of these in 650 words. And this is not like you might have seen in the UCAS webinar about your match for the subject. No, this is 17, 18-year-old young person. Please tell us the meaning of your life in 650 words. These questions are asking the student to explain who they are, and by extension, the match they would be for the list of universities they're applying to. So we've got, for example, question 1 here. Talk about a background, identity, interest, or talent. If we think back to my 4 pretend students earlier, if the computer scientist is applying to computing colleges, that's the topic I'm going to want them to write about. But if they're applying to broader-based curriculums, I probably wouldn't want that. I'd want a different focus in there as well. And other questions and things in here that students are going to have to be writing about. And then we have those supplemental essays for each university. You might get the fairly standard, why do you want to come to us? So Duke has a great question here. Why do you consider Duke a good match for you? Is there something about the academic or other offerings that attract you? That's a fairly vanilla kind of question, but bearing in mind this is a university with a 92% reject rate, it's not just, well, your basketball, pretty cool and the weather's nice. You will be referencing professors at that university whose lectures and papers that you have observed. You'll have done detailed research into the clubs and societies you want to join, but that's something you can do. But we have the slightly trickier ones. Georgetown, for example, very well-known Catholic university just outside Washington, D.C., has this. What does it mean to you to be educated? Now, that might seem on the one hand a fairly simple question, but if you know that Georgetown is a Jesuit university, when the Jesuits talk about education, it means something slightly different than maybe it does in normal parlance. And so you've got to know enough about why are they asking you this question. Now, if you write an answer to this question without really understanding that actually, what are Georgetown trying to find out about me from this question, you'll probably miss the point. And when the admissions officer is reading it, they'll go, aha, it's a great essay, but you don't really know who we are. Probably means you haven't done the research into us, which probably means we don't want you. And then we've got the crazy ones here, like the University of Chicago, very well known for having really quirky questions. And this is one of the questions they asked last year. Who does Sally sell her seashells to? How much wood can a woodchuck really chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Pick a favorite tongue twister, either originally in English or translated from another language, and consider a resolution to its conundrum using the method of your choice. There is no right answer, but you have to understand the very quirky academic culture of that university to be able to write this question to then hopefully do well in the process. Again, it's not about the tactics, it's about an overall strategy of understanding where am I applying and what am I applying for. So with the US, you have to start early. Hopefully that's become apparent, but this is a timeline that we like students we work with to come through. So year 12 being their penultimate year of school. So that would be a student who's now at school thinking they will finish school in 2024 to go to university. They need to be working through building their college list, going through the preparatory phase of things like taking admissions tests, visiting colleges, working through a process into the summer where they're starting to think about this bigger set of materials that they are going to write and their high school is going to put together for them, and working through those into the autumn. It really is a year's worth of work to put it all together. I'm really making sure you're getting started early on it, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to give enough of it. And then there's a couple of other points that families need to understand as well. There is no way of avoiding the financial elements of applying to university in the USA. At the very top end, you're looking at about $87,000 per year for tuition and rooming and board. And if that is money that you have, then you have all the options in the world. But if you are looking for trying to reduce the cost of that, it is going to impact where you can choose to apply. Now, having a US citizenship can help here. It can help in two ways. Firstly, more US colleges are going to be need blind for a US citizen than for international students. What does that mean? It means that the university is not going to consider your financial circumstances when deciding whether to admit the student or not. It can help in a second way, because if you have citizenship and, crucially, residency in a particular state, and every state defines this differently, you might pay significantly lower tuition to go to a state university in that state. And there are some reciprocal ones where states have deals with other states. Now, that doesn't mean that if you want to go to Stanford and you're from California, you would pay less, because that's a private university. But if you were going to UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, and you had residency in California, then you would probably pay lower fees. So it's not as simple, but it does delve into a little bit more detail. Other things to know about the USA. It is a place where lots of students want to pursue sports. We know about sports scholarships at universities in the USA, but sports works in different ways depending on how you want to go through it. It is huge business. There are coaches of US university sports teams paid millions and millions of dollars each year. So don't think this is, oh, I throw the javelin a little bit, or I played soccer for my school, can I have a scholarship? There are people on these sports teams who have already got Olympic medals, and then they're going to university to do this. But it's important to understand that, are you using your sports to get money? So I'm recruited to play sports. Or am I using my sports as a way to get into a university and make myself more competitive? As I mentioned earlier, a hook into a selected university. Regardless, it is a completely different process. If you want to go down the sports route, you need to get the attention of the coaches first. They control the process, and the level of information you need to be providing to them, including a lot of video highlights, is extensive, and that would make your timeline even earlier. So we're looking at maybe 18 months out, contacting sports coaches with information there in terms of making sure and figuring out, is my sports going to be something that helps me get into university? And then, so once we get through this process, what else is involved? Well, there's a lot of preparatory activities that you are going to do. So you may, for example, have to demonstrate interest. There's a great photo here of MIT. Some universities will track the leveling of engagement an applicant has had with the university before their application has come in. Not everyone does, but some do. What does that mean? It means you might visit, and you might go to their webinars. It definitely means you will get on their mailing lists with the email address that you are eventually going to apply to, and open every email they send you and click on the links. We all work in this digital age. We know we can track emails. We know we can see whether people have opened them and followed our links, and universities will track this as well. You're going to have to build an extracurricular profile that is consistent for where you're applying to. So if you, for example, looking at Princeton, Princeton has a long-standing history of wanting students who are involved in service. So if that's a university you're targeting, then how are you building up your service learning opportunities to be able to write about those in your application? And because of this extensive writing, you need to be learning about the colleges as well. You don't want to be opening up one of these essays the night before it's due, and at that point realizing, I actually don't know the nuances of the curriculum and culture of this place. I need to have that detailed understanding of it. You're going to have to deal with the different applications. So even when you get to this point of doing it, different universities have different systems. Are they on that common application? Are they a school that uses the rival coalition? Is it a state system like the University of California, the University of Texas, or is it like MIT or Georgetown where they just decided you apply directly to them? Different timelines, different paperwork, different things that high schools have to provide, different passwords students have to remember. And of course, they're all great at doing those kind of things. So all these other elements of the process come into it as well. So the USA, start early, very complicated. And now for something completely different. Canada, though we might attach the two together, has a fundamentally different admission system, much closer to what you may be used to in other countries around the world. And it therefore makes it actually a very attractive option for students who are looking for some of that North American experience, but possibly some of the workload or the scary statistics about how selective the name brand universities are is a little away. Canada, because of how the geography of it works, has a relatively smaller population for a very large landmass. And so the Canadian population is very widely spread out across a narrow band of the country. And so because people typically won't fly from one end of Canada to another for university, we have a lot of very good universities across Canada with different types of universities designed for the populations of each territory or province of Canada. So British Columbia and Quebec and Ontario and Alberta and so on have all got smaller universities, mid-sized universities, large universities, medical doctoral universities, liberal arts colleges, comprehensive universities, to allow the students from within those areas to have all the choices available. And though you might know places like McGill and Toronto and British Columbia as those world-class universities, that's primarily based on their graduate school work. So what are they doing? Getting doctors trained, creating PhDs, doing research. At the undergraduate level, the quality is basically the same across the board, regardless of which Canadian university you go to. So different kind of process in terms of how that works. And because of this situation, the admission system is actually very straightforward. Different parts of Canada have different Canadian high school curriculums, and each of them have worked out an equivalency to things like GCSEs, A-levels, IB, French BAC, German Abitur, etc. And so the first thing that you would be looking at when shortlisting Canadian universities would be, is my student eligible? Are they taking the right things to actually legally be allowed to go to this university? And when I talk about Europe tomorrow, that eligibility thing is something we'll delve into. But Canadian high school students have to take these subjects. Have you taken them? Yes, great. You are now eligible. Then the university will look at, okay, of all the students who've applied for this program with us, how do the grades the students got make them a good candidate for us or not? And they're very transparent about this kind of stuff, where you will find that the university will say, almost on a flowchart diagram, okay, you want to apply for a Bachelor of Arts from the British curriculum, here's what you need, and here's what would have got you in last year. So all that kind of mythology and strategizing with the US is gone. We're back to tactics. We're back to this very clearly delineated process. So how do you start to move forward with this? universitystudy.ca has a very clear website. So you can go on to universitystudy.ca, click on search programs and search for the subject you'd want to study, whether it's a bachelor's or a certificate, and what language you want to study in. Bear in mind, bilingual country, so there's a lot of degrees taught in French. So you can start to identify all those kind of options and figure out what might be out there. What you will start to see as you delve into that is the fact that all these different subject areas will be grouped into a program. So you will find that there's history and there's French and there's politics, etc. But they're actually all just a Bachelor of Arts. There's physics and chemistry and biology and maths, but they're all a Bachelor of Science, commerce and engineering similarly so. So actually, typically what you're applying into is a specialism within a broader program of study. And so big universities that might bring in 5, 10, 12,000 students are just looking at you as a candidate for a general area of study. So you're applying to sciences, they need to know that you're decent at science. So they probably want to see that you've done some maths for the last years of school and maybe a science or two. You can get in for Bachelor of Science and then they'll figure out which science once you get there. Commerce is a mathematical degree, so they've also got to see your maths, engineering, maths and physics. Bachelor of Arts, basically 3 A levels or an IB diploma, Abitur, Baccalaureate, etc. in there. General admission into a general program of study and then specialize once you get there. So the applications, actually what they're looking for, are not particularly extensive. There is a little bit of complexity that you might be doing this a couple of times because where the university is in Canada will determine how you apply. So for example, in Quebec, here's beautiful Quebec City, you apply directly to each university. But if the university was in Ontario, you go through the Ontario University Admission Centre, which is a bit like a system where you apply to them and they funnel it out. If you're going to British Columbia, again, there's Apply BC, depends where it is. But each of those applications, because it's just general admission into a general program, is actually relatively little work. What do they want to know about the student? Who are you? Name, date of birth, address, telephone number. What have you studied? Name of the high school and the qualifications that you've got there. And then what would you like to study with us? I'd like to apply to University of Toronto for Bachelor of Arts, University of Guelph for Bachelor of Arts, Brock University for Bachelor of Arts, etc. It's like a UCAS statement that you will have maybe seen earlier, but without any writing, not by the student in terms of the personal statement, not by the school in terms of a reference. There are some little bits of writing that some universities can ask for. The University of British Columbia does have a little personal profile, but typically speaking, it's not much work. Our record this year is a student who did 17 minutes from starting to finishing an application to McGill. It's not a lot of work. It's much more straightforward because a lot of the decision about what you're going to specialize in comes later on. Okay, to wrap this all together, and before I take some questions, I'll tie this into then what I'm sure is things a lot of you are talking to Henley and Partners about already, is about then citizenships and how these kind of things work and onward pathways. And again, here we see a difference between the two systems. In Canada, in almost every case, it depends a little bit on the accreditation of the university, there's an automatic right to stay for 3 years after graduating. So you do your 4-year bachelor's degree, you don't need a job offer, you don't need to have sort of that letter in your hands, you can stay for 3 years. And after that, you're on a pathway to residency in Canada. This is a very deliberate decision made by the Canadian government to get more talented young people to Canada. In the US, it is not so generous. A very common thing we get asked is, I want to go and study in America because I'd like to work there. Well, firstly, if you say that in your visa interview, you will be denied your visa almost on the spot, kicked out of the room, because they need to see evidence that you will leave. And so the limited options to stay is generally the case. There's optional practical training called OPT, which differs per the subject of your major. So a history graduate is not going to be allowed to stay for the very long. A STEM graduate might potentially get up to 18 months, but there's going to be restrictions in there. So the most likely pathway is a student coming out of a US university, unless they're going into further education, is at some point soon going to have to go back to the country that they've come from. So very different options there as well. In terms of the payments, it's also going to be different in different ways. Canadian fees will be much lower for students who have a Canadian passport. You don't even have lived in the country. If you have a Canadian passport, you pay Canadian rates. And if you have a French passport or you're a Francophone citizen, there are also ways in which if you studied in Quebec, that could also be significantly cheaper. In the US, as I explained earlier, having a US passport doesn't impact really the fees. That would be a residency. but it can help you with little bits later down the process. For example, a lot of US citizens who might be waitlisted by a university will find themselves taken off a wait list, perhaps if a spot becomes available very late on. So if, for example, it's late July and a university needs to find a student to come, they're unlikely to offer that spot to a student who then needs to go and get a visa. They're more likely to offer it to a student who has an American passport. And having a US passport will also make you eligible for federal aid through a thing called FAFSA. That is actually not just money you can use in the US. You can take that federal aid and use it all around the world. It is worth noting that that loan is on relatively commercial terms, though. So it's not the same as you might be used to in other countries where it's more of a student grant. Okay, covered both systems, the complicated US one and the significantly less complicated Canadian one. So let me hand back to Tess and see what questions that we have.
Yeah, thank you, David. First of all, just to reassure everyone, you will be able to receive the recording of this because there is a lot of information. David has gone into depth in both countries' processes and the different systems, which I hope you're very has been enlightening. It certainly has been for me. One of the questions I had, and please, anyone who's got questions, just pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so David can answer them now. But there is one thing that I was thinking of, is that if and I know we've had this conversation already, David, say a family coming from a different country who had their child in a university and they wanted to leave the country and start studying in another country in university in Europe or the UK or the US or Canada. How easy is that? If you're talking about the US and Canada, would that be something that a family could consider?
Yeah, I mean, the US system will make that significantly easier because of this kind of sort of buffet style situation. So when you're on the kind of UK, European, Asian model, where you started on day one and there's this kind of pathway you have to follow, if you've been on a different university's pathway, it's quite hard for them to say, well, how does that equate? Because our students have done maybe 2 years of this and you've done 2 years of something else, which is why you tend to find in those options, if you don't like what you're doing, you kind of have to start again. Whereas the US, because it is this credit-based model of just, well, we need you to do some of this and some of this and some of this, can look at everything the student has already studied and see, well, we need you to have done 2 credits of foreign language. Well, you've done 6. Great. Well, we'll give you those 2 credits and that will count towards your degree. Now, this happens within the US. So students do transfer very famously between universities. Barack Obama, for example, started off at Occidental College in California. It was close to his home in Hawaii. And after a couple of years, he transferred to Columbia University in New York on the other end of it. And his degree is only from Columbia. So if you are needing to make a transition because of family reasons or geopolitical instability, the US is a much more flexible pathway because that's basically how the degree is designed.
Okay, that's really useful. Actually, and now I've got a couple of questions here that have come up. So the first one is, what are the SAT scores required for the best universities in the US?
Yeah, so I see this question, I see the next one, and it's again, I'm not picking on the people asking this. That's a very tactical question rather than a strategic question. The first thing I'll say is there are no requirements. It's not like you can look on the UK university websites and say, I must have this to get in. It doesn't work in that way. Might an SAT score or indeed an ACT score, and the SAT has the better branding, but the ACT actually has the more test takers worldwide, might that help you get into a certain US university? It could. But if I just pick out MIT, Yale, and UCLA, just 3 examples for the current cycle to show this, how it works. If you're applying to UCLA right now, they will not look at a test score. They are legally test blind. So you can have an 1600 out of 1600 SAT. Sending it to UCLA, they are putting it in the bin. They are not allowed to look at it. You're going, oh, okay, well, UCLA, I don't need a test score. I won't take a test. MIT require you to have a test. So if you're applying to MIT this year, you must have an SAT or an ACT score. And though they're going to publish a range of scores that last year they typically accepted, having a perfect score is no guarantee. They will turn down students with perfect scores and take students with lower scores because of other factors into it. And Harvard at the moment is optional. They will look at a score if you send it to them. If you don't send them one, they're not going to be bothered. So you've then got to make a decision. Am I likely to get a test score that is going to help me in the specific admissions process of this university based on me as an applicant.
Mm.
I think that's why the US is so bonkers complicated.
It is, isn't it? It is quite ridiculous. And Sri Hari has also asked another question: what kind of extracurriculars do US universities look for?
Exactly the same. It's going to depend on the university and the student. If I use an example, just a silly analogy to try and explain this, but it's a question we get all the time, and it is, I know, so complicated when we're not used to how the US universities do it. Saying I want to go to a really good American university is analogous to saying I'd like to compete in the Olympics. It's a very general ambition, but it's a little bit imprecise.
Yeah.
Saying I want to compete in the 100 meters breaststroke swimming in the Olympics is like saying I'd like to go to Stanford. But if you're competing for the 100 meters breaststroke swimming, we know for that, here are the things you're going to have to do to become a good candidate. So the more precise your ambitions are, the easier it is to answer what are the things I need to do.
Yeah.
But if it's just, what do I do generically to apply to good US universities? Well, I'll give you a generic answer. Do a lot of really good stuff really well. But when we're talking about universities rejecting 97% of their applicants, generic doesn't cut it.
No, it really doesn't, does it? Now, Fiona's got a completely different question. Is it advantageous to be a French citizen applying to Canadian colleges outside Quebec?
Advantageous, yes or no, it's not going to really make any difference. Financially is the big issue. So you don't have an easier route into Quebec universities as a French citizen. You just pay a lot less. Okay.
That's a very succinct and good answer. And then we also have a question about whether or not students can be given direct masters in the US or Canada. I'm assuming that means if they have a qualification in a different country, they can go into the US or Canada to study a master's.
Yeah, typically speaking, yes, the universities will be saying what their requirements will be. There'll be a bit of subject specificity. So if you want to do an engineering master's, they want to know you've got a lot of maths and physics in your undergraduate background. And you might also have extra things for a GMAT or a GRE in there. And again, I know I'm a broken record on this, but in the US, it depends. You've got to look at the specific requirements of each thing. It's not like, and it's a shame, but every other country, there will be websites because they're government-controlled systems saying this is what you need for everywhere. The US, you've got to put the legwork in because what one wants is not going to be the same as what another wants.
Absolutely. Good. Right. So I love it. Is there any other questions? There's none that come up. I'm just wondering about, yes, there is another question. What are the GCPA differences in acceptance rate for a student coming from another country?
Okay, again, so they're still looking about the cumulative GPA, which is the grade point average. Again, this is where sometimes people can get themselves confused because they can look on the website and find that this is the average accepted GPA of a US student. A lot of US universities will employ specialist international admission staff who travel the world going to meet with students. And so just because it says, right, well, in this country, sorry, in America, we've typically accepted students with a 3.8 GPA. And then you go, okay, well, in my system, that would be A star, A star, A. Therefore, I'm going to get in. You're not applying for America, so that doesn't apply. What works is what's coming for you. So I had a student we've spoken to last week who calculated that based on his GCSEs and A levels, he had a GPA that would make him competitive to University of Southern California. I know for that student that his GCSE grades are completely not competitive from this context to that university because a US university is accepting different proportions of students from different parts of the world. And so the cumulative GPA is a bit of a misnomer. Again, it's a very tactical element of it rather than actually understand the bigger picture behind it.
Okay, now we have another really good question here. What about non-typical students, i.e. I'm 44 and already have a degree? That's a good question for the US and Canada, I'm assuming. So we'll answer
if you already have a degree, then the US won't be considering you for bachelor's. In fact, if you've already started somewhere, they won't be considering you to start again. You become a transfer, and so you'd be looking for a master's degree. Yeah.
That's fairly straightforward. What about benefits of applying for early action in the US? Another question from Paris.
Yeah, so I've tried. This is going to get very complicated and even more than it was. different universities offer different application timelines, and there are policies associated with it. So early action is an application policy that some universities offer, where you'd apply typically by an October or November deadline in the final year of school and hear back in December or January. The benefits of that will be that there's potentially a little edge at some universities, that there's a higher chance of getting in, but also psychologically you hear back earlier. I'll extend that, however, and say that there are other types of an early application. So there's restrictive early action, which is what Harvard, Yale, and Stanford do, where you can apply early, hear back early, but you can't apply to other universities at the same, all the other universities. On top of that, there's early decision, where you sign the binding legal commitments to attend that university if they offer you a spot. Now, early decision can be transformative in your chances of getting in. I don't want to go too much deeper than that, but it's, again, a very complicated strategic element.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Now let's have a ping through. There are a few more coming in. The average yearly cost for Canadian universities?
So that's going to depend on the subject, the passport, and the location. So engineering for an international student in an expensive place like Toronto, you might be pushing kind of 35,000, 40,000 Canadian dollars a year. Okay. History for a Canadian in Newfoundland, you might be looking at 3,000 Canadian dollars. So it depends. No,
it does depend, doesn't it? Another one from Valentine. You mentioned that there's a financial advantage having a Canadian passport. Does the same apply for those who simply have residence permits who are not yet citizens? I don't know if you know the answer. So, yes. Yeah.
I won't say 100%, but I'm pretty certain that you get the same rights.
Okay. Can studying in the US help towards citizenship, or not particularly? No. From what you were saying earlier, I don't think that's really the case.
No, it's one of the biggest misnomers in this whole process. And you have to prove, like, for the person who asked the question there, if you turn up to your visa interview and they go, "Why don't you study in America to be a citizen?" they will kick you out there and then. That visa interview will go no further. You have to show proof that you are going home afterwards. No, that's fair enough. And another question, and then we're nearly there, I think. I'm just going through them, make sure I haven't missed any. If somebody is going to study, do a master's in the US, do they go alone, or can they take family potentially if they're there are certain rules about it? It's going to depend on the level. There's obviously, you're going to have to prove that you've got the financial means to support them. It'll depend on the length of study as well, but yes, in principle, but the devil will be in the detail there.
Okay. And last question, does the IB have any advantage over A levels for the US, or not particularly?
So let me sort of walk through the logic of this. The first thing is that the university, particularly those really rejected ones, are going to want to see the student has a track record of academic success. So if it's a case of, well, if we did A levels, I could get 3 A stars, but in IB I could only get 40 out of 45, then you're better off at A levels. So obviously they want to see that you've got the best thing, and that would apply for all these other high school things. However, if it's equal and you're applying to one of those universities with a very broad curriculum, then the IB will allow you to demonstrate your skills in a broader way than A levels would. So a student with A star in maths, physics, and chemistry, well, that's great if they got 3 A stars, but if they got higher maths, higher physics, higher chemistry at 7s, and standard English, standard second language, standard humanity, then for a broad-based liberal arts and sciences US curriculum, that IB is a better option. However, again, it's not as simple as this versus this, like you'll see in the UK, like I'll talk about in Europe, or like I said in Canada with maths at Commerce, where if you do this, then this. Every year we'll have students get into US universities who are not the most qualified applicant we have there. We worked with a student last year, our best tester. He had 12 9s at GCSE. He had 4 A stars predicted at A levels, which he went on to get. He had a 1600 SAT achieved first time. He was diploma on 2 instruments. Oh, and by the way, he'd swum the channel. Harvard still said no.
You're kidding.
Harvard turned it down. Our student who rode really fast for Great Britain did get it. Now, the first student's in Yale now, so he's kind of all right. But this is, I guess, to wrap the whole thing up. That student with those kind of test scores would have been fine at the top 3 or 4 universities in every other country on the planet, because they're running a credential-based system where if you've got the scores, it follows closely. The US is not. And that's why it's so exciting, but that's also why it's quite complicated.
And that's why, for anyone, because I think we got to the end of our questions, so thank you everyone for that. But I think this has been very enlightening, and hopefully everyone listening can see just how complex the US application system, the university system is, and rather refreshingly how straightforward the Canadian one is. So very, very different landscapes. But of course, we're here, Henley and Partners Education are here to help your clients, families make these decisions, because especially for the US, I mean, I think you've probably understood, it is highly complex, and ensuring you choose the right university to suit your child is essential. And guidance in this respect, I don't think anyone will do it better than David, because he, as you probably know, understands it inside out and back to front. And on that merry note, I just want to thank you all for being with us today. David has made reference tomorrow at 10:30 UK. He's doing another webinar, but on European universities, so completely different. Please feel free, if you have questions or you would like further information about Henley and Partners Education, just ping me an email. It's in front of you on the screen, and you'll receive a recording of this from Henley in the next few days. So you'll be able to listen back, because there was so much information in there. You may want to listen again. Anyway, on that note, thank you all, and hope to see you tomorrow. Goodbye. Thanks, David. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.